Welcome to the Share Hope, Bring Love podcast, where we bring you stories that illuminate the power of God's hope and love, even in the darkest of places. I'm your host, Rochelle Starr.
And I'm Rachel Hunter, your co-host. Together, we'll explore incredible life-changing stories and the impact of gospel outreach, Christian community, and discipleship.
In each episode, we explore narratives that not only uplift, but also offer insights into how hope and love can transform lives. We believe that these stories have the power to touch hearts and inspire action.
So whether you're seeking to be inspired or to learn, this podcast will be a reminder of the light that exists in the world. You're in the right place. We're here to share, uplift, and connect, one story at a time.
Well, welcome to the show, Share Hope, Bring Love. Let's go. We are back. The last episode of the season. It's been really fun doing this with you.
It's been a good run. Yeah, lots of fun conversations.
I mean, would you have even thought we would get through 12 episodes?
We followed through, and that's a really good sign.
Yeah, but our listeners have been really encouraging, giving us good feedback and really following along with our journey. We're really excited for next season, but this is our last episode of this season, and we're going to talk about a few things this episode. So we hope that you will follow along, share this with friends. Go to our Instagram and go to our Facebook page, as well as our website at scarlethope.org, and check out all things Scarlet Hope in between the seasons.
Yes, I think we really do love to share stories of what God is doing, and the podcast is just one way. So social media is a great way to hear little snippets in real time of what's happening, or join our newsletter. We try to send out one really good story each month. But today we're going to pivot a little bit, and we want to talk about Derby Outreach, which happened a couple weeks ago. We want to talk about what's coming up in the ministry, but we're going to start with a little bit more of a serious topic, trauma. And I think may seem random, but I think it's really relevant because a lot of the women that we encounter have faced trauma in their lives, and it becomes very prevalent. And I think as we talk about the ministry, people start to ask, how do you deal with the brokenness? How do you deal with those things? And for us, we've taken a lot of time to learn about trauma, and you are a great teacher on trauma. So I would love for you to start the conversation by just sharing what is trauma and why do we think it's important to talk about it as a ministry?
When you told me we were talking about this on this podcast, I was really trying to think, like, we don't want to be gloomy on our last podcast, but Share Hope, Bring Love is truly about loving the people we're bringing that hope to in Christ. How do we love them the best? And so at Scarlet Hope, we've realized through the years that every single person that we serve has trauma in their background, whether that be a large T trauma or a small T trauma, that they have experienced some sort of adverse effect on their life through the years. And we've seen this in a lot of different ways that we'll talk about, briefly, but it is truly the best lens in which we can see the people, the vulnerable, the broken pieces that we're, of the people that we're serving. But Rachel, it also helps us have patience. It helps us have compassion, and it helps us to have a better understanding of people's stories. That way we can bring the love of Christ to them, but also we know Jesus is the hope and the healing that they can experience. And so when we first started sort of understanding this, it was actually all the way back in 2013 when we had this transitional living program. I was living in the home also with the women that we were serving, and I really honestly didn't understand what trauma really even was. I didn't understand how it was impacting people's present. And so we began this journey of trying to become a gospel-centered, trauma-informed care ministry. That doesn't mean we're the experts on trauma. That doesn't mean we're even certified to do that necessarily. But what it means is we train every individual on what trauma is, what it looks like, the impacts that it has on their childhood, on their present, and on their future. And so it helps us love people the best way that we possibly can. And now I can say, after many, many years, everybody that serves here directly with women at Scarlet Hope goes through trauma training, and we can talk a little bit about that. And You've gone through it as well?
Several times, yes. Always room to learn.
Yeah. What have you learned since coming on to Scarlet Hope, what have you learned and seen that impact the women that we served?
I think it would be helpful, too, to define trauma. Trauma is brokenness in the world at the most basic sense. And so there's like really technical definitions where it's an experience that a person has where they feel or perceive or experience unsafety in some level. And so trauma, like little t traumas, could be things like food insecurity, where not knowing where what meal is going to come from isn't a hugely traumatic incident, but over time that little t trauma builds to have an adverse effect on a person, specifically a child. Or a big T trauma might be a car accident or a shooting or the death of a loved one. And so trauma can vary in intensity, but also in duration. And those different things impact people differently. Yeah. And so I think understanding that was helpful. And coming from a Christian background and in the church where maybe trauma has become a buzzword in the secular culture and the church wasn't adapting as well, I wanted to understand trauma through a biblical lens. And so seeing that we are broken people, sin has broken the world. And unfortunately, one of the things that impacts is our brain. And so trauma rewires the brain. And scripture, I would say, affirms that. Like, sin has broken everything around us. And sin, trauma, it's not what it should be. We're experiencing it. And so for me, learning to view the world of like, trauma is really the impact of sin on the world. And as a believer, my opportunity is to restore hope in the gospel, and that is trauma healing.
And we've seen God heal people's brains and people's lives through not only like medical facilitation of healing trauma or counseling or different therapies, but in community. Mm. You know, I think about, there's so many ways we could talk about this topic, but one of the things that we do identify at Scarlet Hope is this concept that we did not create. It's just called the ACE score, and you can Google it and research it, but it is an adverse childhood effect, and it measures the level of severity. Most of the women that we serve at Scarlet Hope have between 8 and 10, which is the highest level of trauma that you can encounter. But what we found after they've been in our programs, after they've been in our communities, that they begin to heal, and that score actually goes down. And it's really cool because it does show you that not only does science prove that our brains can change and that our neuro pathways can change, but they have to be in a safe environment to change. And so that's what Scarlet Hope is able to provide in community and in discipleship, is really walking alongside people who experience such traumatic pain, whether neglect or physical abuse, or 85% of women that we serve in the industry have experienced sexual abuse as a child. Whatever the abuse is, we believe that God can heal that. And we're not the healers, but we can lead them to the healer and provide healing in community.
So if we take this concept of what trauma is and like a biblical view of it, what does it look like practically to be a trauma-informed ministry? How does trauma-informed impact the way that we do ministry here at Scarlet Hope?
Yeah, so we have a few, well, there's really 7 principles that we kind of talk through, but I'll only kind of grab out a couple. One is we are not the experts on people's lives, and that every single woman that we serve was created by God with innate desires and longings and skills and a voice. So we have this saying that we say to the women, it's like your voice and your choice. That a lot of times when you don't approach people, vulnerable people, with this lens, you tend as a person that's advocating for these individuals to make the choices for them. And that's not trauma informed because we don't have the history, we don't have the perspective and the lens that they have. So it's really coming to an understanding of what is their voice and their choice. How can we walk alongside them in those decisions and help them, help believe in them, but also part of having a hope in a future that Jeremiah 29:11 promises is, what has God created you to be? And so that's one couple principles in there. But I think the other thing is like, how do we provide safety for these individuals? How do we ensure that our volunteers that have direct access with the people that we serve are a safe place, non-judgmental, that they're not expecting the women that we serve to do something or be something that they're not. And so safety is just really important, and it's providing that in relationship, but then also in space.
Yeah. And it's been a few minutes. We have so many topics to cover today. And so we could talk about this for hours. We literally do like 2 and 3 hour trainings on trauma. So we're just running by here. One thing I do want to hit on is that not only do the women we serve have trauma, but often our team may have their own trauma. And so I think one thing I've learned a lot about is that trauma-informed care is me being aware of my own small T or big T traumas and how that's going to interact with someone else who's going through their own trauma. And I think that's a really easy way to care for your team is saying, hey, be aware of your own story as you're engaging with women working through their story.
Yeah.
I do want to keep us moving, but before we hop topics, I would love if you maybe shared an example of a story of a woman that you served who had trauma and how these principles and ideas helped you walk with her well.
I mean, I could tell a few countless stories, honestly, but one that comes to my mind is a woman that was severely neglected as a child. She was in and out of foster care. She never knew where love was going to come from. Yes, food, absolutely necessity, but as a child and she was seeking nurture, she never got any of that. And so fast forward, she ages out of foster care. She goes into the sex industry and she begins dancing. And it was several years before we really connected and I began to understand her story. One of the very first things that I made very clear, like both to her, no matter what you tell me, no matter what it is that you've gone through, that I care about you, I love you because I love Jesus and he loves you. And I would repeat this to her all the time. Now, of course, she didn't believe in Jesus or any of that, but oftentimes when people have been hurt by people, they don't trust other people. So let alone a God they cannot see. And so one of the things that we just began, safety, going back to safety, is like showing up in her life in a safe way. The second thing was she needed real resources. And so being able to provide those and help guide her and come alongside her with those needs and resources. So we were able to meet, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs talks about the basic things have to be met before we can sort of move up to real healing. So this would go on for a couple years, and she began experiencing for the first time in her life, not just me, but volunteers loving her so that then she could start to really see herself the way that God was seeing her. So she started asking questions and what would life look like and what would it look like to not have to survive, but what would it look like to thrive? And so, and that's a principle that we talk about a lot is like, we don't want just people to survive. We want people to thrive. So walking alongside her with the lens of trauma has impacted this young girl in grave ways, and having the belief that God can heal her and really walk with her into the life that he's designed for her. I think, I first had to believe that about her. Mm-hmm. And then she started believing that for herself. And now today, she's walking with the Lord, and it's a really beautiful, beautiful healing journey.
If someone wants to learn more about trauma, like this is like pricked an interest in their mind, what are some resources you recommend?
Well, we hold trauma trainings virtually, and we do them quite often. So tap into that. But I mean, if you are a caregiver of somebody that has experienced trauma, or you yourself, there's all sorts of books out there, and we can link that in the podcast. Mm-hmm. Actually, we'll just do that. But there's books that we recommend. Our training, there's other trainings, but read up on it, become a learner of trauma, both to understand yourself better, but then to be able to share hope and bring love in the best way possible.
And I think one huge takeaway for me is, as I've learned about trauma in our setting where we're working with vulnerable women and hearing their stories, it even starts to change your lens and your view of other people in the church. Maybe someone responds differently than you expected, and you can be frustrated and be like, why do they respond that way? Or maybe you don't understand why someone's so sensitive to it. And so having a trauma-informed lens of saying, hey, everyone around me, my coworkers, the other volunteers on our team, the women in the clubs, we've all been impacted by sin. It just gives a lot of grace to people. And I think, totally worth your time to learn about trauma. Trauma is sad and heavy, but good things have been happening, right? So a couple weeks ago, it's been 2 weeks now, we had Derby Outreach here in Louisville. And so, tell me about Derby Outreach.
Well, I mean, I think we can both talk very abundantly about this topic as well, but we decided, just like we talked about with the Super Bowl outreach that we did in Vegas, that right here in our headquarters city is an event that goes on for 2 weeks where exploitation and trafficking also increase among all the other industries, right? And so how do we during that time reach as many people as possible? So our goal, which was so small, sounds like in the beginning, which was to really connect and reach with 150 people. God gave us the grace to reach over 1,500. And it was through all different various forms. The clubs, which we increased outreaches for that. We brought roses to women on the street, and we brought awareness flyers to people that were leaving the Derby. We also were able to connect with several just new clubs. Several clubs opened right in time for Derby that had never been open before and owned by new owners and all of that. And even though that sounds hard, we don't control whether they open or whether they close, but it's that God opened the door for us during Derby outreach to serve them. And so people we never were able to meet, now we're connected with. And we've actually been able to help several of them with resources and different things like that. I think that Derby was a complete success in the way that God organized and allowed us to have so much access to so many people in 2-3 weeks?
Yeah. One thing that was really cool was the street outreach. So we did street outreach a little bit differently in Louisville than we did in Vegas. In Vegas, we were approaching women on the streets who were soliciting. And at the Derby, there's a lot of people leaving, and there is trafficking happening, and there are women soliciting, but it's just a mob of people. And so we had informational flyers that we could approach to kind of share what's happening in the city and signs to look for, and giving them cards so that if they saw it throughout the week that they were there, they could share it with the woman and she could contact us. And so it was really awesome. My team was walking around the city, and we were able to talk, with people who worked at Churchill Downs who were seeing it and didn't know what to do, and equip them. One woman walked up to me on the street and she said, "Are you the people with the human trafficking?" And I was like, "Yes, why?" And she's like, "I have a friend with me right now who needs help. Can you give me something?" And so we gave her some resources to run back to her friend. One woman shared her own story of how she had been in the industry and how God had gotten her out. And now she's working as an advocate at another ministry. And she wanted us to pray together. And so we held hands and prayed in the streets. And so fun.
That.
It was really fun.
I love that. And our text outreach was really awesome. We were able to connect with many women. I think over 1,000 text messages were sent. 480 or somewhere in there. Conversations were being carried on. I mean, it's just, I still can't get over, Rachel, that a text message can unlock freedom and bring hope and Jesus to somebody. And so our team got to meet in person with a woman. She was living at a motel here in Louisville. And when our team showed up to bring her food and clothing, she had 2 other women with her. And then they went back the next day, and there were other women. And what we recognized was, it took one brave woman to say, "Hey, I need help." And then we were able to help multiple people. And so it's just so cool how God allowed us to do that. And our team is still working and walking alongside her.
And I think that's one thing that people can forget is there's a lot of hype around these events, both for the event, but also doing ministry at them. And we get really excited about these big numbers. But who we meet, it's not just like a one and done or even like spending 1 week with them. It's a journey. And that's where the full model of the ministry comes in, where it's like, we went and talked to thousands of women through text message and in person. But now we have dozens of women that we get to spend the next year walking alongside, doing trauma care with them, saying, "You have a hard story. We want to hear you. We want to be a safe place." And seeing God bring the fruit. Like the stories that we're telling on this podcast are women who have been on this journey for years, but the Derby or the Super Bowl, these outreaches are the beginning of that story for many women.
And we're still getting stories from the Super Bowl. So I anticipate that for the Derby too.
Yeah. So it's been a really fun, spring that we've had the podcast going. And you mentioned we're about to go on a break. So what's going on in the ministry? What's happening at Scarlet Hope in the next 6 months?
Yeah, I think we're really trying to hone in on text outreach and really expand that as much as we possibly can, both through all the Scarlet Hopes around the country. God has given us this tool that is just like a diamond in the rough, you know? How will people know that there is opportunity and there's Jesus if they never hear and we can never see them or find them? But this tool has allowed us to do that, and so we're really excited to keep expanding that. But also, we just launched Dallas, and the vision of that is coming to life. God has provided really in amazing ways there to be able to see women in Dallas reached. All over the country, God's doing like incredible things. And so obviously we're going to keep doing outreach, keep building our communities that women are going to serve in. And then we're offering some new programs that are just beginning. Some of our team got certified in a particular curriculum that they're going to start offering. And so just really, how can we best love the women that we serve and walk alongside them and keep discipling them?
I think there's a lot of like new things in the rumbles, right? We're partnering with churches more and more and saying, how can we as a ministry better equip churches to receive women and to serve the women in their community? And so many different projects we're working on there, which is really fun.
We should tell about Hope for Kids.
Yes.
Hope for the Future.
Yes. So back in January, we started praying about what is our organizational response to children. Not just general children, but the children specifically of the women that we serve. A lot of women that we serve were also children of women in the industry. There's a lot of like cyclical and generational involvement. And so we've begun identifying ways as an organization that we can serve not just the woman, but her family holistically. And we've given some resources and tools to our sites. And so in the next 6 months, we're really going to start pushing whole family wraparound care, both through volunteers, but also folding them into local churches, partnering with some potential organizations to create curriculum for them, which is really exciting. And at the same time, we're answering the question, if the average age of entry into prostitution is 12 to 14, and we're in the church and our kids are being exposed to things, how do we as believers, parents, and youth leaders address also the issue with our own children? So beginning to create some resources and equipping for Christian families as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to believe that this month is 17 years that we've been pursuing this mission of bringing the hope and love of Jesus to women in the industry. And to think that I could have met a woman in the first year of all this and her child is potentially, if she was pregnant, about to be eligible, so to speak, to go into the industry. You know, we have watched God break generational chains all through these 17 years. And so we just feel like God's given us a response that we're really excited to share with everybody eventually in the fall. Yes. How do we love people well, whole family and all? And yes, our ministry is focused on women, but we want to break the chains so that their children never become someone we serve in the industry in the future.
It's going to be a great fall.
Yeah, I love it. I'm excited.
Yeah, and I think come back to us in the fall. We're going to have more episodes after a summer break and more stories of how God is, sharing hope and bringing love to women in the sex industry.
Thanks, everybody, for listening and for following along. We're really excited. See you next time. As we come to the end of today's episode, we hope you've been deeply inspired by the stories we shared. Our mission is to spread the hope and love of Jesus with women in the adult entertainment industry.
If you feel inspired to join the movement and make a difference, we invite you to visit our website at scarlethope.org. Follow us on social media at The Scarlet Hope for updates, or consider joining a local team in your own community.
Together, we can make a world of difference, sharing hope and bringing love to those who need it most. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to having you on our next episode.